Hello everyone, welcome back. So in this final example for this week, we're going to have a little bit more fun with transformation. We're going to play around with rotate to kind of create a really fun spiral effect, and we're going to make it animated using the mouse cursor position. Except this time we're going to talk about, what if, we want to take advantage of the fact that transformations do stack on top of each other. Sometimes that can be helpful. We don't always have to use push and pop, and that will be an example of where, things can get pretty crazy once we start to stack transformations. We can create really interesting animations using that idea. So let's start here by, we're going to write a little bit of code that's going to draw a series of circles. And then we're going to use that as the basis for our spiral. So let's say we're going to write a for loop here. Let's say we're going to draw 50 circles. Okay, so I'm going to write a for loop that's going to repeat 50 times, right? As such, using the basic ingredients again, right? Counter, condition, and increment. And then at each repetition in the loop, we are going to draw a circle. Now we're going to calculate a different diameter for each of those circles based on where we are in the sequence. So let's say we're going to make a variable here called diameter, and we're going to use map to take our loop counter, which we can think of it as like a circle ID, right? And this goes from 0 to 1 less than the number of circles we're drawing. Okay. So here I could say 49, but a better way to do this, in fact, would be to, instead of hard coding this into a variable, a number here, let's define a variable. Let's call it n for number of circles. Okay. And then in here, we're going to replace 50 with n, and we're going to replace 49 with n minus 1. Okay. This is a little better because now if I change my mind, if I go and put like 25 circles, I don't have to go and change the boundaries of the map function anymore. Okay. So map, right, takes a number that goes from 0 to n, and we're going to map this to a diameter. Let's say it goes from 0 to, I don't know, 300, just to start with. Okay. And we're going to draw a circle at 0, 0 using that diameter. Okay. So our circles are all up here, and obviously the last one here is completely overlapping the others. So let's set our white stroke and no fill so we can see we actually did something. Okay, we have some circles. Let's spread them out a little bit more. Let's go to 500. And let's move the center, right? 0, 0 point. We're going to move that to the center of our screen here because that's going to be more conducive to this kind of spiral effect we want to create. So before we draw all these circles, we're going to translate the origin, move it from the top left corner to the center. We're going to translate by width divided by 2 and height divided by 2. Okay. All right. So now we've written a little bit of code that created this pattern. Okay. And then just to make it maybe a little bit more fun too, we are going to make this, let's make this interactive. So I'm going to throw in the mouse cursor here. I'm not going to bother mapping it. I'm just going to say the diameter of the circles, it's going to go from 50, that's always going to be the smallest one, to 50 plus whatever mouse y is. Okay, so mouse y is going to become kind of a slider I can use to set the size of the biggest circle. Okay, and map is going to do the rest in between. Okay, so this is, if I have mouse y equals 0, they're all on top of each other. And if I have mouse y equals height, right, then they more or less fill the screen, okay, and everything in between. This is kind of neat. Okay. All right. So the other thing we're going to do now, obviously, if we have circles like this and we try to rotate them, they're just going to spin around the origin. We're not going to get a very interesting effect. So I'm going to change here the circle mode. I'm going to go to circle mode corner. Okay, and let's see what happens when we do that. I'm going to say, actually, it's called ellipseMode in P5. Even though we're using the circle command, it uses the same mode as the ellipse. Ellipse is just a more general version of circle where you can have a different width and height. Okay. So ellipseMode by default is center. We're going to set it to corner. Okay. Now these rectangles are being treated like they're boxes. Okay. So there's like, you can imagine a box around it, and the coordinate we give it is the top left corner. So now we have this effect here where they appear to be moving out because they all share the same top left corner. Okay, and that, imagine a box around the circle. All right, nice. Okay, so now that we have this, if we wanted to quickly kind of create an interesting spiral effect, we could take advantage of the fact that inside our for loop here, if we throw a little bit of rotation, right, every time we repeat without having to worry about how much, we're going to set this to angle mode degrees, let's say. We're going to say angle mode degrees. So we don't have to think in radians. And let's say we rotate by 1 degree every time we draw a circle. Okay? We are going to get this shape. Right? So now in this case, I'm taking advantage of the fact that, yeah, these transformations, they stack on top of each other. But I'm going to use that to keep building, right? Every time the loop repeats, I'm going to rotate a little bit more, right? So I can start to create these interesting patterns and shapes. Okay? So we've made this interactive by allowing the size of these circles to change based on my mouse cursor. Let's use the X value of the mouse to control how much rotation we're applying every time we draw a circle. Okay? So we could say here, we could put in mouse X. Now, if we just put in mouse X, it's going to be a little bit intense because mouse X, right, goes from 0 to, well, let's try it. It goes from 0 to width, right? So this would be 1 degree rotation, right? 2 degree, 3 degree. And then if we keep going, of course, it will start to create, pretty crazy patterns. Sometimes we have interesting shapes in there, but we're jumping like way too much in between. So let's just fix that by just making mouse X smaller. Okay, we're not even going to use map here. Let's make it 10 times smaller. Let's see where that takes us. Okay. Alrighty, that's a little bit more interesting. We could make it 100 times smaller maybe, so that I can like really play with this. Maybe that's too much. Okay, that's kind of an interesting pattern though. Let's split the difference. We're gonna go. Okay, so I kind of want to be able to just rotate, but also do some full rotation here because we get some interesting patterns when we do that. Like when things line up, for example. Cool. So this is like a really simple example of a case where, we might want to take advantage of the fact that transformations stack, right? This is especially fun when you combine this with loops, because now you can all of a sudden have these like really kind of interesting complex series of transformations being applied. And, we didn't have to write a lot of code to do that. So we just rely on the fact that every time we repeat, we rotate the canvas a little bit more each time. Okay. Cool. So this is like a fun little spiral. Now let's play around with this a little bit more just for fun. We're going to add some color to this. So let's change the color mode here to HSB for hue, saturation, and brightness. And instead of using a white stroke, no fill, okay, we're going to turn off the stroke, and we are going to set a different fill color for each circle inside the spiral. So let's say we're going to map the counter to a hue. Okay, so let's say counter goes from 0 to n-1. So that's the other benefit, right? We can reuse that concept. Let's map this to a hue that spans the full rainbow, okay, 0 to 360. And then we're going to set a fill using that hue, and we're going to get brightly saturated colors. Cool. So now we've got kind of like a rainbow of color, right? That goes from red back to red. And each circle is getting its own color as well, and then gets rotated using that crazy spiral effect that we're creating. Again, just by applying a tiny little bit of rotation every time we loop here, right? We can create a cool effect. And of course, we made it interactive just for fun by throwing in mouse X to have control of the size, and mouse Y controls the size of the shape, and mouse X controls the amount of rotation so that we can play with it. And then why not? Let's add also a little bit of transparency. Now, when we're in HSB mode, transparency is a number between 0 and 1. So I'm going to go with, let's say, 0.3. This is going to make everything somewhat transparent so that I can see through and get the colors to blend a little bit. Cool. All right, so I could play with that for a while. But we're going to leave it at that for this example anyways. So just to recap here, the idea was that you can sometimes take advantage of the stacking characteristic of transformations. If you stack them on top of each other, you can get interesting results. If we threw in like a little translate in there as well, a little scale, it can get out of hand pretty quickly. But in combination with for loops, you can quickly generate really interesting, intricate patterns just by stacking transformations and seeing where that takes you. And you'll play with that idea a little bit for this week's code exercise. Okay? All right, so that's it for this week. We'll leave it at that for transformations. Hope you enjoyed. We'll see you next time.